Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are William Urich, Program Director of Cyber Intrusion Investigations at the Defense Criminal Investigative Service, Stephen Hernandez, Chief Information Security Officer, Acting Chief Technology Officer, and Director of Information Assurance for the Office of the Inspector General at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Frank Konechny, Chief Technology Officer with the U.S. Air Force, and Zulfikar Ramzan, Chief Technology Officer at RSA. Good morning, gentlemen. How are you today?
Good morning.
Thanks for having us here today.
Well, the title of the program today is Enhancing Federal Network Visibility and Analytics. And I'm just going to jump right into it and let you guys start talking because no one wants to hear me. They want to hear what these folks have to say. So the first issue I want to bring up is a birthday, and it's not my birthday. It's the birthday of the OPM Breach. And for some people in the room, they get kind of jumpy when they hear that. Other people in the room are kind of confident about that. So my question to you is, has your agency or the government in general felt the need to speed up security teams' ability to detect these type of attacks? You want to start with Frank?
Well, the Air Force has been doing this for a long time now. We've been prepared for attacks. We have our 16 gateways that basically control the network flow in and out of the Air Force domain. And we have teams already established that actually go after any bad guy or any incident, whatever, within the system. And you know, DoD, when incidents are reported at the Air Force, it automatically goes up to Cybercom, and that handles for all of DoD to spread out what the incident is and what the response should be. So we're pretty much prepared to do almost anything.
So Zulfikar, from the commercial perspective or from your perspective, tell us about your background first, and then what are your observations here about the OPM attack, please?
Sure. So my background actually started off in cryptography, of all things, and that's how I began to work in information security, and gradually evolved when I realized that most breaches weren't because of crypto failing. Most breaches were because of a human error somewhere or something much more fundamental. And so when I came to that realization, I said, okay, everything I've worked on in my PhD may not be that relevant in terms of solving the most real-world problems, and I made a bit of a personal pivot into working on some broader issues. And I think that what we're seeing here is endemic to many companies. It's not like OPM is unique in what happened to it by any stretch of the imagination. And it really spells out the fundamental need for visibility in the organization, for that need to admit that, hey, the bad guys are sophisticated, they're much more motivated, they're going to get past that front door. And when they do, if we can react swiftly enough, we can prevent them potentially from getting out with the critical data. So I always tell my customers, you know what? The bad guy's goal is not to get in the front door. The bad guy's goal is to get your data. In much the same way that a bank robber's goal is not to get in the front door of the bank robber's goal is to get the money in the vault. And if you look at it from that perspective, letting them in is not the bad thing. It's preventing them from getting out. And that's something we can decrease. We can actually improve our risk posture on through visibility solutions and through appropriate measures that take on the right mindset.
So, Bill, a lot of big tough guys over the DoD there. They're afraid of OPM, or they don't even worry about that stuff. What are they?
Well, I can tell you, John, I mean, I'm not a security specialist. I'm an investigative specialist. But I will say that if I think I'd be relatively safe in saying across government, OPM sent somewhat of a shockwave. I don't think it was a surprise to anyone that that there are enemies out there. But if there is a silver lining, so to speak, is I think it brought out for the first time, just to the public as a whole, and even within the government, the sheer volume of data that can be compromised and how quickly it can be compromised, and the overall vulnerability, because even the government is not invulnerable to it. And I think in terms of lasting effect across government, that's probably if there is a silver lining to it. My own personal thought on it, and if you want to call it a fear, is that what I don't want is the whole government or people as a whole to say, this is the kind of attack we need to worry about. This is the kind of thing we need to worry about in security. If we protect against this, it's all going to be okay in the future, because this is a one time. You don't fight yesterday's war. You fight tomorrow's war, and you be ready for that.
You know, Steve and I had your colleague Damon Davis in the studio, and we talked about the Idea Lab at HHS. And he really reinforced me. He said, "Yeah, NASA's got a lot of data, but the HHS, if you just look at the amount of data they have to juggle over there, it's incredible. You worried about OPM breaches with all that stuff? And this is some pretty sensitive medical data, isn't it?"
Absolutely. I mean, it's not just medical data. We're talking about every Medicaid, Medicare recipient, the work done at FDA, fine work done by the folks down at CDC. We're a ginormous target. It's the only way to describe it. Something that OPM did very effectively, though, was make a breach very personal. There's nothing like telling your senior executives, I'm sorry, sir, ma'am, your information was part of that breach, and you need to be aware of this, and these are precautions you personally need to take. That really drove the message up the chain. And we have almost an entire generation now where, from an intelligence perspective, largely compromised. That information is gone. And so we're in a position now where it's like, well, we're never going to get that back. Cat's out of the bag. How do we rebuild so this never happens again? Certainly at HHS, the folks there now are, if they weren't before, which is probably rare, but if they weren't before, they're on point now. They've got the credit monitoring. They're getting the letters. They're having to answer to their relatives that were on that SF-86 and explain, yeah, your name may have been part of that. Mm-hmm. And it's a tough position to be in. So now's a very opportune time to carry the message forward.
I was talking about the front page of the Washington Post above the fold. But Frank, there are success stories as well. And not all the bad things have happened. Can you share with us maybe some successes at Air Force with speeding up IT investigations?
I mean, we do a lot of investigations. I mean, we do a lot of hunting. We have a hunting team already established that goes out and looks for particular things. We have tools that actually look for hash codes now across the Air Force, which is necessary at times, because we're always looking for the threat that we don't know about. There's always the zero-day threats that are existing out there that we have to plan for. And, as we go in with investigations and everything else across, we like to share everything across the Air Force. Air Force is pretty big. You understand that we have lots of bases and lots of things happen all over the place. And so what affects one base, we know could probably affect another base. And so there's the assistance that we have to share right away, or as fast as possible across the Air Force. And as well, we have to share it to DoD, because if we're a target, then somebody else is a target. And likewise, if they're a target, they'll come to us. So when we start an investigation, we go across the board and try to do a good job across and inform everybody that's really what's happening.
Zulfikar, you can give a perspective from 40,000 feet. First of all, because you just got off a plane. Secondly, because you've been involved in many international incidents. So what's your perspective on successes or maybe gaps?
Right. I think Frank really said a key word there, which is hunt. And that's something that we are advocating to all of our customers all the time, because the reality is that you can't be reactive anymore. A reactive posture is what gets you into trouble in the long run. Now, the good news is that even though there are these zero-day vulnerabilities and sophisticated attackers, at some point in the course of every attack, someone utilizes a known tool or some known piece of infrastructure simply because it's too expensive for attackers to do everything fresh for the first time. And what hunting allows you to do is latch onto that first artifact that you know about, then unravel what's going on underneath. And if I have to look at across the entire customer base that I've ever talked to, I think the single biggest mistake I see security teams make repeatedly is underscoping an incident. And by that I mean that they look at that first initial threat and they find if they do something about it, they high-five each other and think it's all done. But as we all know, that's the first sign that you have to look much more deeply. And if you can do it, it's actually not difficult to do if you know up front that you've got to do it. And that's the thing. If you know up front that you're going to need to be able to go back and understand what happened, you see a threat on the network. Can you understand maybe what device led to that traffic on the network that you detected? Can you look at what process on that device led to that traffic? Can you now identify what other devices share some similar behaviors? And all of a sudden, you've formed a much more comprehensive picture of the attack that underlies a specific threat. And to me, that is the golden thing. That is the nirvana for most organizations. If they can start to do that more effectively, they can start to eradicate many of these threats much more readily, relying upon the fact that there are tools for being able to do so.
A lot of current tools. I have 3 grown children, and they don't believe a word I say. And I have these catchphrases. One of my catchphrases. Yeah.
That's to look forward to.
So one of my catchphrases is change for the sake of change is a novelty. Mm-hmm. Change for the sake of progress, that's improvement. Mm-hmm. And so, Frank, have you seen tools, maybe current tools or processes that actually can move the ball and not for the sake of changing things, actually improve security?
There's lots of tools out there right now. We've actually talked with Silicon Valley and their concepts of what they want to do. We've also talked to the Boston Technology Center and what they're doing. There's tools coming out there right now which take slightly different approaches to this. Some take a hacker approach. They understand what the hacker is doing, and they look for different signs of the hacker. As I said, we have tools that actually look now for particular hash codes without the network, and so we can detect things right away and to remediate things immediately. So there's lots of tools that are coming out there. We can't endorse a particular tool, but I'm telling you that after talking with a lot of the technology centers, that's one of the factors they're trying to push is new innovative methods of actually looking for hackers now, as opposed to saying I'm just going to build a wall fortress and I'm assumed that I can stop them.
Yeah. Steve, another variation on this is rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic or on a sinking ship. So change for the sake of change at HHS? I mean, that's a big boat to move, huh? A lot of deck chairs.
It's enormous. It's a $1 trillion portfolio. It's enormous. And, when we look at this problem and we look at the tools and the capabilities that are coming out, it's mind-boggling. But at the end of the day, we also have to look at our other initiatives, our cloud first, our data center consolidation, our use of MTIPs or trusted internet connections, and we have to make sure that we're getting a holistic risk picture. And so, we look at a lot of the same tools my Air Force colleague pointed out, but some of the questions we always have to ask ourselves is what's the interoperability with what I already have from a risk visibility perspective? And then also, if I have this tool, where does it fit into the actual risk equation? 4 components: threat, likelihood, impact, and then your resultant risk. If it only covers one of those, I need to make sure I have capability in the other 3.
When it comes to people, I think this is a key issue here. A lot of companies are having a challenge hiring people, and they're trying to come up with novel ways to find people for that. So how would someone like you, Bill, address this at the Pentagon? I mean, this takes it to the next level. It'll have to be secure and creative, and it kind of pushes, on one hand, you need someone who's creative, original, and think out of the box. On the other hand, they have to have certain security. So this is a push and pull in both directions. How do you handle that?
Absolutely, and I think that comes up across the board in what's called the cyber arena, the cyber realm. As part of what became cyber, and you put cyber in front of anything, and suddenly it's the buzzword. And you had a lot of schools ginning up and cranking out as many people as they can as rapidly. But in the end, academics alone only gets you part of the way there. You can come from a very good school and a very good program. But I think probably one of the most important things is you have to get people in the door. And as you said, in DoD and many other agencies, there's going to have a certain level of security clearance or a certain level of non-criminal conduct in their past. But until you get that experience base, until they've lived and seen really how long it takes to do some of the things you read about in the book, until you see an incident response and how painful it can in fact be, you can read all you want and know, but I think what needs to be is more the use of the internships and the more use of involving people, cross-training. We're lucky enough in my office to have brought someone from our technology department who came in to help us on some things. That's a unique aspect that their perspective they bring, and if there can be more of that cross flow of education, I think you're going to end up with a more rounded person who can help you do the things you need to do. In our case, investigations. It's wonderful to someone who knows a little bit more technology and has done a little bit more of some of the things that our agents are very well trained, but it's like anything. If you don't use it, you lose it, and you can't be up on everything all the time. So you're looking for that body of people to come in who want to learn, but frankly, you want to try and get some of their previous existing skill set and add to that rather than start from the ground up with everything.
Zulfikar, we're talking about processes and people here. I have read, and I think I kind of agree, that most of your best software developers are self-taught, and probably 2 out of 3 are self-taught. They start off with a desire to, at HHS, for example, help someone in the area of dependent children, and they'll develop that set to reach the goal. Mm-hmm. So 2 out of 3. So how do you evaluate someone's skill set if a lot of this knowledge is informal or self-taught? It's not taking a test, that's for sure, especially with security. It's process and people such an important part of it.
I think it's first of all, a huge part of it. It's not just about technology alone. You could have all the right tools, but if you can't use them correctly, then they're all for naught. And so either way I look at the problem is that we are really focusing a lot on how do we simplify the technology to make it easier for the people part to work more effectively. Now, there are a couple of ways to do that. You can use advanced techniques like machine learning and data science and whatnot, and I can proliferate this whole conversation with buzzword bingo. But ultimately, to me, it's about how do we make it easier for someone to come in with a degree of natural curiosity, a natural intellect, and apply that to this problem domain. Because what I find over and over again, it's hard to find those 10th degree ninja, black belt, malware reverse engineer guys. But the good news is you don't need a lot of them. Most threats are pretty mundane. I'd say 95% of what we see in our environments can be handled pretty effectively with a minimal amount of skill. The challenge is that we've often lacked the visibility to know when we're in that 95% versus that 5%. And so we are certainly working very hard towards making the products easier to use. And we found over and over again, we've been in situations where with a couple of days of initial training, we can get people up and running on basic hunting capabilities. They can start to tackle some of those basic threats, which actually represent the vast majority of what we see. And over time, they build up that skill set. And so I tell customers, don't focus so much on trying to hire those most experienced hires because, number one, you'll have a hard time finding them. If you do find them, you've got to worry about keeping them, which is even harder because there's only a small number to go around and they all get recruited by everybody else. find some of those guys out of college who are naturally interested, who have that natural curiosity, and find ways to screen for that. And I think it's feasible because that should be part of every job description at some level. And I think if you have them in place with a bit of training, they can be so effective, probably far more effective than most of what we do today. And so to your point earlier about change, I think there's an element where we are scared to do something different for fear that it's harder. Now I think we have no choice. We have to do something about the cybersecurity problem. And the good news is that I think we're in a position where we can actually achieve that in a way that we couldn't have done in the past.
There's a quote of a fire that broke out on an oil platform in the Caribbean, and they asked the young man, "Why'd you jump off the oil platform?" Either you get blown up or jump off. And I think many people sitting at this table in the federal government, they're going to get blown up or have to jump off or jump into something new or change the people, process, and technology, maybe take some of the tools.
Right. Inspiration and desperation, right?
Yeah. This was desperation when he's jumping off that oil rig. Let's take a quick break, come back, we'll talk more about people, processes, and change, and maybe focus more on visibility on the network. I'm your moderator, John Gilroy, in the discussion Enhancing Federal Network Visibility and Analytics. Our guests today are William York, Program Director of Cyber Intrusion Investigations at the Defense Criminal Investigative Service, Stephen Hernandez, Chief Information Security Officer, Acting Chief Technology Officer, and Director of Information Assurance for the Office of Inspector General at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Frank Konechny, Chief Technology Officer with the U.S. Air Force, and Zulfikar Ramzan, Chief Technology Officer at RSA.